Welcome, good morning. I'm Jess from BFI Network. This is our lucky 13th webinar. We've got another 2 lined up this week, and you can find details about how to register for those on the BFI Network as usual. We're recording all these sessions and they're being released on the BFI's main YouTube channel. We're releasing a new recording every Monday, so do please keep checking back there if you've missed any of these and you want to catch up. If you haven't joined us for one of these before, I'm going to point out a few things that will just make life a bit more interesting for you on the webinar. There's a chat box. Do feel free to engage in there. My colleague Cara is lurking in the background, and she's going to be talking to you all in the chat box if you have anything you want to raise there. Just please note to change the settings in there to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments. Otherwise, I think it defaults to just sharing it with the panel, which isn't as much fun. There's also a Q&A box, so you can type questions in there that you'd like to ask Andrew. Do feel free to engage fully there. We can keep questions anonymous if people would prefer that. We usually get quite a few questions, so we'll try and answer as many as we can, but we probably won't be able to get to all of them because we only have an hour available. So today I'm really excited to be interviewing comedy script editing legend Andrew Ellard. Andrew has worked on every kind of comedy project you can imagine, from Detectorists and Chewing Gum to Red Dwarf and Miranda. This year, with Expectation Entertainment, he has developed projects such as In My Skin, Intelligence, and Elmer's Not Normal. As a writer, he wrote the horror film After Death and Channel 4's Blaps comedy series Outsiders. He is currently head writer on a 10-part fantasy sitcom for CBBC. So, Andrew, thanks a million for joining us.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Where are you?
I'm home. I'm in my office. Well, I say my office. It's the spare bedroom, but we don't have a bed in it. So instead, it's got my treadmill desk in it. I have a standing desk with a treadmill, and I write at that.
That is pretty impressive. I don't think I've seen one of those before.
Oh, you'd think it was a device of absolute torture, but it turns out once you've got your wrists rested on the nice soft pad at the edge of the desk, you sort of forget you're walking, and you can write for kind of 3 or 4 hours and do your 10,000 steps and not really notice that you were doing it, which is the only way I take exercise. And God knows right now in particular, when I'm sat at home basically just eating, it's literally that and walking the dog are the only exercise I get, so something has to happen.
That is pure multitasking. I love that. You're writing and thinking and working out all at the same time. That's the future.
Yeah, I wouldn't elevate it to the term working out, but yeah.
Well, they do say though, don't they, that if you put your body into motion, it helps you think better.
And I mean, certainly, but you know what? I'm productive, but I don't know if it's I'm being productive because I want to get off this thing. And so the quicker I do everything and solve all the problems and write enough stuff, the quicker I can dismount and go off.
So long as it's working for you, I don't think that matters. That's great. So you've given us a sort of idea there of how you're spending your lockdown days. So you're writing at the minute, is that right? You're working on this?
I'm just finishing up. I mean, in some ways, it's been very fortunate that I've had a lot of scripts to deliver. So we're doing a 10-part series, of which I'm writing 5 episodes, and other writers writing the other 5. So I'm either helping them with their stories, sending notes on their stuff, doing polishes on their drafts, or I'm writing my own ones. And it just means I've got to do things. I'm so fortunate that there's a large amount of stuff I need to turn out. And I would have been at home anyway. I would have had to have been at home getting it done. And this way, nobody gets in touch and says, do you want to come into town? Where it's a 2-hour trip there and a 2-hour trip back. I had to focus. God knows what I'm going to do when I've finished all of this. We're on the last 2 or 3 scripts now. And I'm a little anxious about but what happens when I don't have deadlines? What happens when I don't have to be productive? I've promised myself I'm going to try and put this energy into writing new pilots, which I never get the time to do. But I have no idea if I'm going to actually do it, or if I'm just going to crumble in a heap and go, what's wrong with the world? We're all dying.
Yeah, that's my concern, is whenever I become slightly less busy, maybe the existential dread will creep in and I'll realise the awfulness of the situation
Yeah.
outside of this room. I've been in this room, I feel like, for about 3 months.
I'm hating weekends. I always loved weekends, and I've come to really resent the 2 days. And we've had bank holiday weekends, 3 days on the trot without the need to do stuff. And I try and keep my weekends sacrosanct for my wife and dog, so that we make sure we get quality time. But blimey, it's all of a sudden you're there at 11 in the morning going, this is going to go on all day. What do I do with it? I don't like yeah, that's the bit I'm struggling with. I'm fine with the weekdays at the moment. It's only the weekends that are a nightmare.
Yeah, this is no differentiation between anything at the minute.
Yeah, you want those lines.
Yeah, we want the rules back. Can you tell us, so just jumping into some of my questions, I've got lots of questions, but I'm sure everybody here today is going to have things that they want to ask you. But I just wanted to kick off by asking you a bit about your career to date, how you got into script editing, whether that was always your ambition, and you're known for comedy, so was that something that you intentionally went after, or was it a sort of happy coincidence that you found?
Yeah, I mean, it was always what I was a fan of, is all. I got into script editing by accident. I didn't even know it was a job. I didn't really understand it. I didn't know giving notes was a thing you could do as a profession. I was working at Grant Naylor Productions, the company that makes Red Dwarf, and they had the Red Dwarf feature film in development while I was there working on writing content for their website and doing the DVD bonus material, like making documentaries and finding deleted scenes and all that stuff. And Doug Naylor, who co-created the show, sent me a draft of the movie and sort of wanted a fan's opinion, because I was a huge fan of the show. And I sent him some notes, and he went, well, wait a second. And I got this lovely thing back. These are the best notes I've ever had. And it's like, oh, okay, that's nice. I don't know what that is, but good. And I'm there going, we'd believe that bit more if that had happened first, and blah, 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 blah. And the next thing you know, he's recommending me around. And then Paul Jackson hired me at ITV to consult on anything that they greenlit in the comedy department at that point. So shows that were definitely going ahead. And suddenly I was giving notes to like Guy Jenkin and Jonathan Harvey, like people. I grew up on Gimme, Gimme, Gimme. I grew up on Drop the Dead Donkey, and for a while those rooms were very intimidating for me. And so I just kind of gave my notes and ran away. And bit by bit, you kind of realise that maybe this is useful and it's okay. And then I got picked up to do IT Crowd, and I got recommended hugely off of the back of that. And suddenly it's my career, and I went freelance. And I had no idea. My only experience with script editing was I'd written an episode of Doctors back in about 2002. And I didn't have a good experience on that. I had a really kind of miserable outcome for that one. An episode got made, but I never did another one. And that was because I totally didn't get the relationship. It was a brand new script editor with a writer who didn't know what this process was. And wow, was it the blind leading the blind. And it just all sort of went wrong. But yeah, no, comedy was because I was a fan of it, and because I like the mechanics of it, if I'm honest. I haven't reached into drama because there's different types of script editor on different types of show, and I'm very good at fixing story. I'm very good at getting the kind of comedy engine running, like build the format of the show so that you can write 6 more of these and it will still be giving you stuff that you don't get to episode 3 and go, I've burnt through all my ideas now what do we do? To make sure there's fuel in the tank the whole time. And comedy seems to rely on that kind of stuff quite a lot. So I don't know, it's just a knack, I think.
So you had no formal training, really. It was you were giving really great instinctive notes because
I've got like a degree and a master's in film, but
yeah.
I can't. Honestly, the most useful thing about that was while I was at university, I wrote loads of very, very bad screenplays just for myself to try and get my writing career turned into something. I ambitions at the time of writing, I think on the soaps actually was what I wanted to do at the time, because that seemed like well, they always need writers. They're writing, they're putting out 4 episodes a week. They're gonna, you know, forever need that term. So I'd kind of got a vague thing there, but nothing. I never did a kind of screenwriting course or anything. It was always film studies. It was always, you know, the more academic view of film. So I saw a lot of stuff, and it kind of broadens your knowledge base. But I wasn't like trained in any of this at all.
I think that's really interesting, because I get asked a lot by people who are wanting to get into development and script editing and writing, I think, because they see it as a way to both improve their own writing, make some money, and also sort of practice, hone those skills. And people are always asking, you know, should I go away and formally study it? Because it is hard, you know, there aren't that many means to do it, and there aren't that many opportunities, and it's not a job where it's clear how you actually get into script editing. No. I always advise people just to read a lot, watch a lot of stuff, really immerse themselves in, you know, both good and bad, you know. Yeah. You can learn as much from the bad scripts and the bad. Totally. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I do on Twitter is I do tweet notes, which is the thing where you watch an episode of Doctor Who, or you watch a movie and go home afterwards and you kind of go, oh, yeah, okay. But I think actually you could have fixed a few of these things by moving them around and by reshaping them more. The trick, I think, with script editing, almost always, or at least with and then any kind of development, producing and all that kind of stuff, is to be interested in what the writer wants to do with it. I always say my job is to get you to the best version of the thing you're trying to write. There's no point me turning up and saying, yeah, but couldn't this all be like more broad and farcical? It's like, if they don't want to write a broad farce, it's definitely bringing that suggestion in. It's like, what's the best version of the show you can possibly imagine? And why isn't this script that yet? And then how do we make that be? It's got to be a listening job. It's why I've stopped doing, every so often, new writers, young writers, because I do a cheap rate for young writers. It's not cheap. It's just cheaper than what I charge for telly. But I do a cheap rate for young writers for one-on-one. And I used to do those as written notes. So they would send me a script, I'd write the notes, and I'd send them back. And actually what I found is that's kind of, it's brutal. And it means that if I go down a rabbit hole of, you know, what you might consider to do is that, and then you have to write the 12 things that gets you to. And it's like, yeah, but if they don't like that first idea, I've just typed 5 paragraphs for no reason. Whereas if you get them on the phone, if you do one of these, if you do a Zoom with them and you sit there and you go, now one thing you might consider is this. And if their face goes, then you know to not pursue that avenue anymore and to go in another direction. It's much more productive, I think, to get on the conversation and to talk about what they want it to be, and get that idea more clearly. Because hopefully on the page, it should make really clear on the page, this is what the show is. Confident shows you can always spot on the page. But early drafts tend to be quite tentative, and you don't know yet completely what the show is, and you're still figuring it out. So no, it's a lot of a listening job. I hope it's a lot of a listening job.
Yeah, it's sort of facilitating and enabling other people's vision, isn't it? And yeah, no, your taste is completely subservient to that, and should be. I did Cardinal Burns, the sketch show on Channel 4. By the way, those are still up on the Channel 4 player, and they're so good. Cardinal Burns, brilliant sketch show. But they did one sketch called Vomit Cops, which was 2 cops go to a very kind of like David Fincher 7 type crime scene, and the corpse is revolting and they can't stop throwing up. Now, I don't like throwing up jokes. I don't know why, but there's something about my taste. There's something about that. It's just not to my taste. But the thing is, the rhythm of that sketch, whether you like vomit jokes or not, the rhythm of that sketch is exactly the same. There are functions of like, well, when's the best moment for that first one to happen? And when do you get it? And when is it too much and you have to hold it back? So you can kind of, there is a, you know, sort of doing the plumbing practical quality. You'd have to like the house to do the plumbing, you know? Right. Yeah.
There's a practical quality to it.
It is so subjective comedy, isn't it? So I'm interested in hearing, like, when a script or an idea comes across your desk, how do you identify, if it's not to your taste, how do you identify that it's funny and that it's got legs? And does
I
your
mean,
take...
the thing is, you can kind of tell if you're brutally honest with yourself. You can, like, if you don't like Mrs. Brown's Boys, you okay, fine, you don't have to like it. But if you don't get why that is crafted and things are landing with an audience, your taste is too high in your own, like, you value your own taste above just basic facts. There's rhythms that either work or don't work. I remember a piece once complaining that an article that was about how Miranda was terrible show, and it's so obvious, and she turns to camera and says things, and like, aren't we beyond just hearing that kind of stuff? And then a few paragraphs later was really praising Peep Show. And it's like, but Miranda turning to camera is literally the same function as hearing David Mitchell's inner monologue in Peep Show. Like, you can, those are the same joke shapes completely, and they work or they don't work for you, and you like one show, you don't like the other show. But if you can't see that they're the same functionally, then you shouldn't be giving the notes. Like, you have to have an awareness that what you like and what is good are two distinct things. We all have blind, you know, I mean, I've got a blind spot for Coen Brothers movies. I almost never get on with Coen Brothers, and I know they're great. I'm so aware that I'm missing out on lots of very good films, but there's something about the taste back there that I just don't connect to.
Yeah, it's just... But
you're aware of the quality regardless, you know. But
do you think, so would that get in the way of you developing one of those films? If they were to approach you with the script, would you...
God, imagine a world.
Obviously you jump on it, but like, would that be challenging?
I mean, I think, you know, if they heard me say this, they wouldn't want me anywhere near stuff anyway. But no, of course. I mean, you want to work with brilliant people, and I'd rather acquire the taste. That's the other thing. Your palate changes and grows. It's not a fixed thing. There is stuff that I watched at 20 that I didn't get, that at 40 I completely understood. I can't think of a better way to acquire the taste than work with the people who are making that stuff. Whether they'd want me because I'm sat in the back of the room not laughing at their jokes, I don't know. But no, I hope it wouldn't be a barrier.
No.
I'm in a thought experiment now where I'm working for the Coen Brothers, and suddenly it's, what?
Yeah, it's not a bad thought experiment. I mean, no. I've taken myself there as well. It's quite nice.
No, it's great. It's great, but now I've got to go back to my regular life, and frankly, that's quite tedious. So,
back on the treadmill, Andrew. Back on the treadmill.
Yeah, back on the treadmill.
So, if there are any filmmakers in the audience today who are thinking about developing a new comedy idea, whether that's for film or for TV, what should they be bearing in mind if they want to develop something fresh and original? Because I think there's always a push in comedy, isn't there, to be doing something a little bit more boundary pushing. Are there any? Yeah. There's
a funny thing with comedy, I think, where newness is absolutely vital, and it's why it's quite hard to revive old comedies, because their mechanics have been long since exposed. There's whenever a new thing comes along, when Alan Partridge turns up, and it's this, it's boundary breaking, just in terms of like how you format a piece of television and get laughs out of it. It was a chat show, but it wasn't a chat show. Those kind of, you only get to break that once. By the time you're the fourth person to do it, you're like, oh yeah, the parody chat show, I've kind of seen this already and I know what it is. Things get codified very quick, calcified almost. They become rigid very quickly. So we like surprise. Comedy thrives on surprising you. It's how a joke works, is an outcome that you hadn't considered that gets out before you would had chance to consider it. So newness is absolutely vital. I mean, I did a thread on Twitter a couple of years ago about, like, I don't understand any push against diversity when it comes to, particularly to comedy. I mean, everywhere, but I don't understand why we're not grabbing with both hands for any version of diversity in comedy, because it makes your content new. Because what you know for sure, like if you look at Time Wasters, the ITV2 sitcom, which is about a black set of black characters who travel back to the 1920s, I think. Now, that gives you access to jokes. There's a terrific one where they realize they're not in period outfits, so they go into the clothes store, try on the period outfits, and then run out of the store due to plot reasons. And once they're out, they go, wait a second, have we stolen these clothes? Wait, are we responsible for the myth that all black people are thieves? Now, that's a time travel joke that only a black writer and a black cast can do. And you suddenly realize, I've never heard that joke before. I've heard hundreds of, have I accidentally invented rock and roll? You know, the Marty McFly, but that's brand new. A white guy comes walking out of the store owner walks out, he turns and goes, oh, I didn't know all black people were thieves. I must tell my friends. And again, you can only tell that joke if you've got a writer writing the show who's coming from lived experience. It just gives you access to stuff that you hadn't seen done before. Old rhythms maybe, but new jokes. And comedy needs newness all the time, newness. The hardest thing right now is to be quite a bland, white, middle-aged, middle-class guy like I am, trying to do anything vibrant and interesting, because I'm coming from the least vibrant and interesting part of the culture. But no, reaching for newness, reaching for new shapes and things, surprising people. The worst sitcom scripts I get are always the ones that go, you know, the setting is a shop, and you know, these people bicker a bit, and it just sits there. And what they've done is they've seen how sitcoms are and gone, I'll do one of those. And of course, the best stuff is, I've seen how sitcoms are, but what if they was this? What if they were more? What if something else has been done? And the same's totally true of comedy movies. Like, how you push the genre forwards is really important.
So is it about taking those established structures and just cracking them open a little bit to... Yeah.
I mean, it's knowing how... It's useful to understand how the old ones worked, but the job isn't to imitate those and do the same thing. It's to imitate and then innovate a bit. It's to move stuff forwards a bit. All your favorite filmmakers are kind of pushing forwards, whether it's in comedy, whether it's in drama, whether it's, you know, Christopher Nolan's big blockbusters, wherever you go. Like Booksmart, I loved Booksmart. And that's got, it's just, you know, oh, well, when they get really high, we'll turn them into dolls for a sequence. And it's bloody hysterical. But even just the rhythms between those characters, you realise I haven't seen that many of that relationship of two friends who are kind of that nerdy and that's cool simultaneously. I felt so understood by those characterizations. that felt a lot more like my childhood than a lot of the kind of teenage boy comedies.
Yeah. You were fine with scene, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's truth. That's the other thing. Truth is really important. If you're coming from a place of truth, of understanding, if you want to, it's why lived experience is really useful no matter what. If you've worked in a place, you can put on camera specifics about that place that nobody else can. That can be a shop. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, special, but shows about lawyers where you go, oh, actually a legal team got involved with this and said, oh, that wouldn't happen, this would happen. And you go, oh, right, as an audience, you're going, oh, I didn't even think about that weird dark corner of that industry. I didn't think about those strange choices that you have to make. That thing of, you know, we watch fiction in part to understand the real world, and it can show you all this, whether it's the care system or working in a newsroom or whatever, it can show you insights into thought processes and emotional reactions that you don't realize were there in the real world. And the best way to know that they're there is to have lived them and then get them down on the page. Anyone can do, oh, my office job is boring. But what's really impressive is when, I mean, that's why the British Office was eventually such a massive hit, was because people suddenly went, yeah, all of those tensions about like who tells a joke and who laughs at it and whether it's not really funny. And those tensions had not been well explored And then suddenly the show comes along and just really focuses in on the uncomfortable, awkward interpersonal relationships. And you just sit there nodding along going, it's so true. And that counts for a lot. If you feel truth, it's not a documentary, but it's true.
Yeah. So your advice would be then, do you think, to look to your own life?
I mean, definitely, as much as anything, but don't feel limited by that. Like you can very few, Agatha Christie didn't kill a lot of people, but it doesn't mean that you can't write good murder mysteries. But what she did was live in a society and be aware of a society that has a layers of hypocrisy and deceit to it. So those are the bits of those books that are true, And then on top of that, you throw in a murder because that gives everybody something to do. I think that's the thing. You can if whether you're coming from difficult parents or raising kids or complicated work lives or an injury or anything specific to your life, you can have those little nuggets, and then of course you can fictionalize the hell out of anything. You find your register. I think you find your, like James Cameron's got all sorts of paranoias about technology and stuff, and he turns them into enormously expensive films.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And I mean, it's such a powerful tool, comedy as well, isn't it? To comment on, what's happening in the real world around it. So I think it can be more insightful in many ways than drama can, just to sort of, if you.
It's got a different kind of set of mechanics to it. It's a lot easier. Comedy sort of seems to come from a point of view of exasperation, a general thing of like, what the hell is wrong with us? What are we doing? Why is this like this? It's a lot of its job is to point out hypocrisies and inconsistencies and absurdities. Drama doesn't have to do that necessarily. It doesn't have to go looking for the joke. So it can just kind of take a status quo as a status quo. Whereas comedy seems to be railing the whole time for some, it seems to be not content. And that seems to be a useful plot. Be malcontents. There's your advice.
Be malcontents, yeah. Powered by outrage.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about great comedy characters, because I always find if I've had a bad day and Peep Show comes on or Father Ted comes on, it's like having a big warm hug, and I can watch the shows over and over again. And I think it's about, so much of it is about character. I never get bored of those characters. And do you have any advice for how to go about just creating those comedy characters that really persist?
Well, it's two things, I think. One is there's an inner thing, which is you want the characters to have enough fuel in their tank that they will always make something funny happen. Built-in ironies. Peep Show, those characters are absolutely perfect. Talk about, not being content with your lot. Like Jeremy's got huge aspirations to put his music, and he's adamant he's got talent when he fundamentally has no talent whatsoever. And as long as he never realizes he has no talent, he's always going to keep pushing. And he's terrible with people. He likes to think of himself as like a nice guy, but he's actually incredibly selfish. And the same is true of Mark. That there are, he'd like to think of himself as the nice guy, but the problem is he's irritated by basically everyone and everything. And that will always, so there's fuel, right? There's a built-in inherent part of a character's nature that you go, oh, you're never going to be happy. And as long as they're never going to be happy, as long as they always want something that they're never good enough to really get, they're going to keep trying. It's Del Boy this time next year will be millionaires. As long as he both has that huge aspiration and simultaneously does not have the talent to make that kind of money, you've always got a show. And stories will keep coming, character stuff will keep coming, and inherent ironies will keep being presented. And then the other half of it is communicating that to an audience so that the characters are so familiar that you can predict that stuff. So when you do your episode of Friends and there is an attractive woman, Ross can't get his words out properly because that's who he is. And Joey is all swagger and confidence. Now, why do I know that? In watching the show, something eventually you tune into how they behave and how they respond to things. And eventually it feels like you could almost write an episode yourself. But for sure, what you can do is kind of predict an outcome. A lot of the laughs in sitcom, and a lot of the laughs in good movie comedy after the first half hour or so, after the first act, after you've clarified who everybody is and made that clear enough that it's predictable, a lot of the laughs come from, oh, that's such a Joey thing to do. That's such a Frasier thing to say, right? It's like knowing them.
Yeah. Like they're your
real...
friends. It's weird. Yeah, it is.
It's totally like, and you have friends in your real life where you go, oh, you know what? Just don't tell. I know we're talking now, but don't tell them, because I just know they're going to have this to say and this to say, and it's going to be such a headache. It's not worth the conversation. Well, predictable behaviour, same thing. I know how they're going to respond, and the number of times you find yourself talking to your friends or a spouse or whoever, where as long as they know the person you're talking about, the story is funny. And if they don't know the person you're talking about, it's about a third as funny. Because then it's just a thing that my mother said, as opposed to, you know, my mum with that thing, blah, blah, blah. Familiarity. And so the big trick with comedy, I think, a lot of the time is getting audiences tuned into those characters as quickly as is humanly possible. Like, there's nothing worse than faffing around in sort of story circumstance and factual setup. Like, knowing the difference between this character is in a situation and who this character is really interesting. Movies thrive much more on characters stuck in situations, but it's really important. The best movie situations are still ones where you go, yeah, but it's that guy in that situation. You know, if you're going to do Romancing the Stone, it's important that she is a sheltered author who has written about adventure but has never actually experienced adventure, because then sending her on the adventure is really interesting because she's worried about her shoes. You know, it's as soon as you understand that, and then every joke in that movie works, because every time she responds to something with another, oh my God, you get where she's coming from, and it's funny instead of like, oh, I'm still learning about this human being. So much of it is about, I rhapsodize about the first episode of Friends. If you look at the pilot for Friends, there's a pre-title. Again, I did a thing on this online somewhere called 7 Lines from Friends. If you Google that, you'll probably find it. Where if you just look at the opening scene of the first episode, in 7 lines of dialogue, they communicate who 4 of the main cast are. It's the most extraordinarily efficient job. And it's because they're all talking about one topic. They're all talking about dating. Monica had a date and they're talking about how it went. And she says it wasn't a date, it was 2 people getting together, having dinner and not having sex. And Chandler says, well, that sounds like a date to me. Oh, Chandler's self-deprecating and self-aware. Chandler knows what his failings are, and also he knows he's a failure. So that gets parked. Joey says something really crass, and you go, oh, there you go, Joey's the crass one who doesn't think. Phoebe says, is this like with the guy I dated who ate chalk? And you go, oh God, that's her life. Right, right. And she doesn't think the chalk thing's unusual, it's just as specific to him. And Monica is being really particular about what the date was and what it wasn't. And you go, oh, Monica's really particular. If you can hone in on those characteristics and giving them one topic to talk about where they will all differ is really useful. For sitcom in particular, everyone talks about how sitcom is based on conflict, and I've never believed that to be true. My feeling is that that's been misunderstood as sitcom is built on difference, on characters being different, on having different takes on the world. It's why Frasier, he lives with his dad, because the working class dad with the comfy but grotesque armchair versus Frasier with his refined, beautiful furniture. Like, you immediately get what the contrasts are there, and you know, oh, when they talk about what to watch on TV, that conversation's going to be funny. What to eat, that conversation's going to be funny. How to spend an evening out, it's a given, and it's all right there, and it's all now. Difference fuels conflict, but the friends in Friends aren't in conflict the whole time, but they are forever different, and they're always reacting differently. If a free pizza, if a pizza gets misdelivered to that apartment, certain of them will keep it, and certain of them will want to be on the Monica will be on the phone for 3 hours trying to get them to take it back. It's not our pizza.
Yeah.
So no, creating characters with huge fueling, with built-in ironies and difficulties and things, and usually it means they're not self-aware. They don't know what their problem is. If they ever learned what their problem was and actually processed it, they'd come out the other side as a better human being, and then you wouldn't have a show, you wouldn't have a movie. Actually, and that's the movie. That's Romancing the Stone, right? The movie version is she learns lessons and discovers how to appreciate adventure and how to let go of things. And that gives you an arc, and that gives you the movie, which is why it's hard to do sequels, because the character's been through and lost the comedy fuel inside them. They come out the other side of it. Whereas with sitcom, you tend to get to the end and go, oh, they nearly learned a lesson there. And you send them right back to the start to do it again.
Yeah. They nearly gained the self-awareness that they need to function as normal human beings in society, but of course they lost it before the credits. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They learned nothing at all.
Yeah. How like life.
Yeah, like life. Yeah, that's familiar. That's why comedy and tragedy are so closely aligned.
Very.
We've got some great questions coming in. I'm going to start going through these now because everybody's sending them in. Oliver Smith is asking, hi Andrew, I'd like to know how you switch between the different comedic identities of each show, especially when you're working on them simultaneously, and how that tallies with your own comedic identity, or is funny always appropriate no matter what?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I try and be very strict with myself and only work on one show in a given day. So if I've got a script for one thing, that's the script I'm on, and I'm doing notes for that. And I try not to bounce too much, because you do start kind of, it's like being in a fridge, you know, and you take on the flavors of all the other things. It's why it's really hard to watch Shakespeare when you're trying to write, because you start getting verbose for no good reason as you start typing. Oh yes, and just suddenly your sentences get a little longer and a little more flowery.
Yeah.
You know, don't watch Aaron Sorkin right before you go and write your drama, because your first 12 lines will be Sorkin imitation. So no, I mean, I don't struggle too much with it, because again, you're working on good stuff. The hope is that the stuff itself is tuning you in. It's no different from watching an episode of one show and then an episode of another show. You should be able to switch. What am I watching at the moment? We're watching Dead to Me right now, and Tales from the Loop. I have no problem watching an episode of one and then watching an episode of another, because the shows themselves tune you into their atmosphere and do it quite quickly and efficiently. And broadly, that's the same for reading and having an opinion, because the nice thing about script editing is it's a reactive art. Right? You don't have to come up with anything. You don't have to sit there and try and think. Because if I was trying to imagine my own shows, then switching like that, trying to write 3 of your own different types of show or something would be really hard. But script editing on other people's shows, people send you scripts. When you read them, you can't help but have an opinion. Immediately, the first thing that happens is an opinion. And the trick is in you know, which opinions are useful and which opinions are shut your mouth, Ellard. Nobody needs to hear that. But there's a, yeah, it's not that tough to kind of bounce between them for that reason, I guess. Or at least I've never struggled with it. Maybe there is a problem, and I've got that one of those kind of brains.
I'm unaware of it.
Yeah, maybe.
No.
Better that, I guess.
Do you find though that, like, as a script editor, when you know, having all that experience behind you and working with other people, when you come to write your own things, does your analytical brain, do you have to switch that off a bit to let you get the ideas out?
God, you know what? It's worse. It's the opposite. I don't know how to switch it on. I have a real problem. I've always had a real problem with, number one, finding my voice. You know, people talk about your voice. I've always struggled to know what that was. And it wasn't until, actually, the movie that you mentioned, After Death, is the first time I got close to, oh, I think this is me. And that was a movie that was really, I mean, it's a horror movie. It's a trapped in a contained building horror movie. But within that, it's a movie about how we use religious mythology to serve ourselves and whether there's any fairness in those kinds of systems. And then there's a whole layer about sort of toxic masculinity. And you suddenly realize, oh, these are all things that I'm incredibly angry about. And finally, I get to talk about them this way. And it started to feel like that was me, the things that I was annoyed about and I really wanted to process through a fictional story. So I've kind of grabbed that lesson and now started writing my own stuff again. I went through a long period of not writing very much at all because it was easier to script edit. Because as long as work's coming in, you kind of don't feel like you're letting yourself down. It's the downside of being hired a lot. Is that I never get time to write, and apparently that's fine because the bills are getting paid. But the horrible thing used to be, certainly, that I couldn't get to the script editor version of me because I felt too much the pressure to be inventing stuff and creating characters and I couldn't hold myself to account. So I'd write the thing and it's like, I have no idea what needs cutting here at all. And it's only been relatively recently, in fact, it's been doing this kids show that's really helped because there's been a churn of material by having to do episode, rewrite. I've kind of had to be this, I've been script editing, essentially, I've been head writer on the whole show. So I've been giving notes to all the other writers about their shows. And then you go, well, I can't tell them that their story isn't working if my story isn't working. And suddenly, oh God, I gotta hold myself to account here. And something did kind of click in my brain. And finally now I'm rewriting much better, much more productively, and with much more awareness of like, well, that doesn't work. You've got to change that. You've got to move that around. Accessing that has been the hardest thing. That's the thing I've found toughest is I kept looking for somebody else. And I've got a very good script editor on that show, actually, which really, really helps. But we tend to have conversations on the phone where I go, I think I fixed it. Is this a fix? As opposed to, I don't know what this is. Help me. Which is how I used to be. Yeah. Was that I can't remember if I've answered the question.
You did definitely answer the question. No, I think it's really interesting. I think, yeah, it's sort of a learning process of you sort of learning how to sort of balance the creative bit of your brain with the more analytical brain. And there's huge overlap, but they are very different skills. One is totally a reactive art. One is, you get the script and you have an opinion. The other is a blank page until you fill it up. And so one it has to come out of you as opposed to something gets fed in and comes back out again. They're very different kind of modes of existing. Got some more questions for you here, Andrew. Do you think producing and exhibiting work on YouTube, so like short films, sketches, is useful if you're trying to move into established industries like TV and film? Does having something self-produced, even if production values might be flawed, is that something worth focusing on?
Oh God, it really is. And do you know what? Get a good microphone. Forget production value the rest of the way. Get a good microphone. That will solve, because mediocre picture everyone can live with. Like we're all watching now broadcast television done off of Zoom. Right? We know how to cope with that. The horrible thing is when someone's got a bloody awful microphone there. But for sure, comedy scripts are really difficult. You have to, it helps to be able to tune into a writer's work. So if I've been very lucky in that a lot of things I've worked on, when I get brought on board, either the show is already up and running or I've seen other things that the writer has done. It's really easy when you've seen another thing from the same writer to look at the script for the next thing and go, oh, right, so I read it like that. It has that kind of rhythm. It has that kind of style. That's incredibly useful and it makes it a lot easier. If you're a brand new writer, I don't know, it's a lot harder to make the thing on the page live in the mind of the person. Scripts are horrible documents. They're full of white space where people imagine what they think goes in those gaps. You can say interior a shop and it's like, well, everyone you talk to is imagining a different shop right now. And then you get really specific. You start laboring the point on the page. Now everyone's bored. So how you put your show into somebody else's head is about good script craft as much as anything else. But there's always going to be a gap. There's always going to be a jump that has to be made. And one of the ways you can get past that is to show them what it's supposed to be like. And nothing better, obviously, than sending a video. If you send a producer a half-hour script or a 90-minute script, whatever, if you sent it with a 5-minute short that made them laugh or cry, they're going to have a totally different take on the script when they get to the script. They're going to go in warmer, for one thing, like just more, oh yeah, all right, I see you've got a bit of skill. Let's see what else you can do. But also, they'll read it with that short in mind, with that little bit of content in mind. So they'll know your rhythm a little bit better. And that might make 30 jokes played better than they would have done otherwise. It's hugely beneficial. Actors are, you know, not hard to come by. If you're doing comedy, go and get comedians, by the way, because comedians have got the timing. Whereas with actors, sometimes you go, well, that's technically the line, but you can't always, you know, you can't give them line readings because it's impolite, but they don't always land the jokes the same way, but you get the emotional truth. So you know, these are all balances and trade-offs. But God knows there's plenty of actors who are out of work who would be quite happy to do something in an afternoon, to have something, to do something funny, to do something interesting. You don't need budget. You don't need huge locations. You don't need you don't need production value. What you do need, though, is something that communicates. And I think I'm adamant that sound is the most important thing in this. That if they hear every line, if they can make out everything that they're supposed to hear, and it's clear and specific, no matter how garbage your video looks, it really doesn't. You can't make somebody laugh if they can't hear the joke, but the pictures are pretty. You know.
Yeah, no, that's all really good advice. I've got another question here from the audience. Sharice Griffiths is asking, do you approach Dramadee differently to just straight comedy?
Slightly, because there is a forward movement generally in dramas. Characters end up in not the same place as they started. It's not quite so built to repeat, but the truth is the lines between everything are so blurred now. I mean, I've done 1 hour comedy dramas and I've done half-hour sitcoms, and to be honest, the only difference between the two a lot of the time is the running time. That when we say sitcom, we say half an hour, and when we say comedy drama, we mean an hour long. But Dead to me is surely a comedy drama, and it's interesting. The characters are quite static, but the story is always moving forwards. It's got that sort of 24 quality where the narrative's always moving forward. But In My Skin is definitely about growth. Like, that's a coming of age story amongst other things. And she's always moving forward. So, but it's iterative. It's specific and iterative. But she's going to come, I would think, to the end of that story as a woman who has lived through some experiences and come out the other side of them, and has a better take on the world, on who she is, and will approach things differently, will be less uncomfortable in her own skin. So you are aware there is a movement creep, and this movement creep even in sitcoms. You know, I mean, they take Chandler from somebody who basically can't get through a date without screwing it up to someone who can be married to Monica and survive. But that took 10 years. Yeah. You know, so the movement is quite iterative. So you just have to have an awareness that the creep isn't inherently bad, that your job isn't to hold everybody back. But even with sitcom, I don't think the job is to kind of hold them in place necessarily. It's just that you don't want to break the show. You never want Crichton in Red Dwarf to become so, what should we say, liberated, that he doesn't feel he needs to look after anybody anymore. Because then the joke's gone. Like, that's funny for an episode, but then you've ruined the show. You never want Rimmer to come to terms with his appallingness. You never want him to kind of settle into the fact that maybe he's a terrible guy and will try and work on himself. No, I want him to be terrible again next week so he can do something really awful, and that'll make me laugh. So it's that thing of just don't break the show while you're doing forward movement. Yeah. But the lines between comedy and comedy drama are basically non-existent now. It's such a blurred line. As I say, I think it's mostly just the runtime. Yeah, I think you're right. Got a question here from Chris Maudsley. He says, "Hi Andrew, love Detectorists. At production companies, I've managed to get a toe in the door, but there seems to be more emphasis on performer-derived comedy for new talent rather than writer-derived, looking for the newest talent at Edinburgh, review troops, that sort of thing. Does seeing someone's writing performed live land better with producers than simply a written page?" I mean, it's the same thing as making a video, isn't it? It's that they saw someone, they sat in a room and somebody made them laugh, and they go, well, that person can make me laugh. We should hire them to make other people laugh. Until you've had stuff put on, it's really hard. It's the nobody likes scripts. Nobody likes a whole wedge of paper that they have to work through. Whereas if you can sit in a room with somebody and they made you laugh, it's really tough for writers now, for sole writers who don't perform. It's really hard. So number one, are you a performer as well? Is that an avenue to explore? I'm definitely not. So that was never going to work. The next thing is to do what people like Sam and Jesse did who are the Peep Show guys, and anchor yourselves to brilliant talent who really want to work with you. Because they wrote so much stuff for Mitchell and Webb, both for the sketch shows and for the TV. And that's, incredibly useful. So connecting yourselves to talent, being somebody that talent can rely on, that's no bad thing. But all else aside, same thing again, go and get your voice heard somehow. And if that means shooting your own thing and sending it in, do that. You've got to get people over the fact that they don't want to read scripts. And it's funny because one of the reasons I have work going on is because of one thing that happens quite a lot is people find performers who are trying to craft a script, actors and stand-ups and whatever, who they really like, who are writing, and it's like, could we not just go and get a writer to write this for them? No, they want to write it themselves. So I come in as script editor and have to teach them how to build stories and how to shape things and how you communicate character and all that other stuff, rather than hiring a writer who knows how to do all of that stuff but just needs some help with the funny. The theory is, I think, that funny is harder to get hold of and rarer. But with narrative comedy, both halves are like equally important. And I always think we're making a mistake. I suspect we could get really good sitcoms out of soap writers, and nobody really kind of pursues that avenue because the assumption is, well, they've been writing drama. But it's like soaps are some of the best sitcoms sometimes. Like Coronation Street could be the funniest show. So no, it's really difficult without, and it's only getting harder because they can sit and watch clips of the performer.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of hope there because I think it's definitely stifled, any writers who are just writers. But connect yourself to talent or get stuff shown to people. These are the ways to do it.
Maybe that plays back into that question about getting stuff up on YouTube, getting paid. Yeah,
it really does. Or do podcast sitcoms. It's so easy to buy a good microphone now. You got to be careful because the problem is the amount of free content. So it's very easy to go, oh, this is brilliant. I can do 30 episodes of this, and it's like, and the 12 people who downloaded it will be very grateful. But I would advise doing short, brilliant things rather than lengthy churns. It's if you find you've got a kind of max audience for one thing, don't just keep making episodes of that. In the same way as I tell writers, if you're writing spec scripts, don't go and write 6 episodes of your own show cold, right? You're wasting your time because you can only sell that show once. If you, instead of writing 6 episodes of one show, write 3 pilots, because the next thing that happens, you get your toe in the door with a company and they say, this is great, except we totally don't want to make a show about undertakers right now. What else have you got?
Yeah.
And the nice thing is, I've got 2 other things. Let me show you one of those. You don't want to say, I haven't. I've just written 12 episodes of the Undertaker thing, so I've got nothing. I'll be back in a year with my next idea. You've got to be a bit pragmatic about those kinds of choices. You've got to be very pragmatic about those kinds of choices. Give yourself options. But go and make stuff, obviously. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just get out there. I've got a question here from Dan Williams. He's asking about how you know if your series premise has legs for development. Like, when do you know if the idea is solid enough to start writing that pilot episode?
I mean, the thing is, write the pilot, because you don't know, because in theory, you've come up with a set of characters and you've come up with a precinct. The sit in sitcom, by the way, does not mean the setting. The number of people who go, yeah, but I've managed to set it in a bookshop, and it's like, well, that wasn't the trick, right? The thing about black books is not the setting of a bookshop. It's that there's a guy behind the desk who hates customers. Like that could be a shot for 12 other things. It doesn't matter. The precinct isn't the sit. The sit is character relationships to each other and to the world. So number one, that's one thing to test. Have you just written a load of people quipping in a work environment or in a house? Because those things on their own, it's who's sharing the house and why that connection is interesting, whether that's family or flat share or whatever. Mm-hmm. Make sure but also you've got to write it. You've got to, this is the thing new writers find hardest is overhaul rewriting by far. And I hold myself to account for this as well, because I really struggled with it for a long time, and still kind of do. People tend to write the draft and then nip and tuck and tweak. And actually, no, you might need to overhaul. You might need to get rid of 2 characters, add 3 more, and change where it's set. But you go through this. The famous story about Peep Show is that it started as like 2 guys sat on a sofa commenting about TV shows premise. Like it was, yeah, it was like a pre-written Gogglebox. It was like Mystery Science Theatre 3000. It had a totally different vibe. And then, you know, the thing is, they came up with characters that were so good that they thrived in. And then the Peep Show device comes in. And Father Ted, I think, was supposed to be a mock documentary when they first conceived it. Now look how surreal that show is, and how that totally, like, their sensibilities are different from the mock doc sensibilities that you would have needed. You got to find the show, and you're carving it out of rock. And one of the things is to be open to change. Don't let it calcify early. Don't go, I've come up with a show, I have now written the show, that is the end of this process. The first draft is just a beginning. The first draft is just, does this work? Does this work? And if you get to the end of the first draft and you go, and I've kind of said everything now. I mean, I can do more episodes where they quip slightly differently, but I've kind of told all it. Well, then you've run out. There's no fuel in the tank. But if you get to the end of the episode and you give it to somebody to read, and they're already imagining other episodes, then you're onto a winner, because it's making the characters people's friends. It's making them so familiar and the situation so blatantly fueled up with comedy that you can go, oh man, and next week this will be the same nightmare all over again, but different. And oh my God, what if this character's mother turned up? What if this character fell in love? And all the what ifs. If it creates a load of what ifs in your brain, you're onto a winner.
No winner. But it's got that engine that's sort of,
yeah, it's got to have the engine in it. Yeah, absolutely that.
Great. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try and find one that's...
God, it has gone fast.
It's gone fast, and we've had loads and loads of really great questions coming in from people.
If people want to get in touch with me on Twitter and ask me stuff, by the way, I'm totally available for that.
Yes.
Just in general. If I didn't answer something useful, I can totally reply to people.
You're great on Twitter, and your tweet notes are brilliant. I love the one about the John Lewis advert. And
oh, yeah, no, that was a weird one to take apart, but it doesn't work. And why doesn't it work?
Yeah, you're right. It's all about POV. It's told way too much from the little girl's perspective, and it's Edgar's story.
Yeah.
Edgar's story.
It's the dragon story.
Yeah. I also want to tell everybody, because I haven't got around to asking you my structure question, but Daniel Kaluuya, he called you the Fresh Prince of Structure. And I think that's incredible. And if I were you, that has to go on your gravestone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, God, look at where Daniel's career has gone. You've got to trust his opinion, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's clearly right as well. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more, and then we're at 11 o'clock. Are you okay to do one?
Yeah, go on, roll it, absolutely. Meanwhile, people are walking out the back of the hall, like, figuratively.
Yeah, they need a wee. No, people aren't leaving. That's good. So from Paul, this is a question about darkly comic material, because I don't think we've really got into this territory yet. But so Paul Blenkhorn's asking, with darkly comic material, what are your thoughts when it comes to elevating and pushing the boundaries with taboos? Should people just go for it?
I mean, look, you can only find the line by sort of, you're slightly like a, you know those electrical collars that people have for dogs, where there's just an invisible fence around the property, and it's not until the dog gets near the fence that the thing goes off. That's kind of the way, that's how you find where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
It's not until you've pissed somebody off or offended somebody. But you shouldn't be it doesn't pay to be reckless, because people can tell recklessness. There's something about comedy that it seems to require audience confidence. You know how everybody's doing Zoom and Skype versions of TV shows right now? And when they first started, there was a noticeable difference with the satire shows. That Have I Got News for You felt very sort of wonky and uncomfortable. And the MASH Report felt weirdly stable. And somebody said, I think it was Joel Morris on Twitter, said the smartest thing, which is, it's because nobody sits at home and worries about whether Nish Kumar knows how to work Skype. Yeah. But within Hislop, you're very much kind of like, oh God, if this goes wrong, like there's a nervousness now. You're nervous watching them try to interact. And the thing is, they keep leaving in all the laughter of them laughing at each other's jokes. And you can tell it's the nervous laughter we do on Skype and Zoom, where we go, I want to let you know that I've heard that, but I've had to leave a gap. You say the thing, then there's a pause, then I do the laugh.
Yeah.
Nervousness does not transmit well as I know how I'm confident I can make you laugh. There's a thing about confidence that's really important. So if you can tell somebody is just with dark humor, if you can tell that person is either reckless or an out of control or uncomfortable and nervous, you won't laugh at those things. Somehow that transmits, it comes across. So it's not a case of I should just go for it or I should be incredibly cautious. You kind of don't want to be either of those things. You want to be somewhere in the middle where you go, yeah, but I know where people's sensibilities are, and I've tested this in a few different ways, and I've looked at how they react to this kind of joke and that kind of joke. And you get to the line, and the line is where we want to be. You're too far over it, you've annoyed everybody. If you're too far back from it, everybody thinks this is all very bland and uninteresting. Yeah. There is something about the edge. That edge. But you're always kind of putting your toe forward. It's like being in the dark and putting your toe forward. It's like, where's the top of the stairs? Yeah. You risk falling, but you know.
I think you should ask yourself, would Julia Davis do it?
I mean, the answer is yes.
Yes, she would. Yeah, she should just leave.
No, but actually, God, there's a great example. Julia Davis is so completely in control of that tone. Like, you know exactly, and also clarity of, you know where the darkness lies, and you know what's author opinion and what's the character's opinion. And I do think that's a thing. There's a lot goes wrong when people put their own opinions in characters' mouths rather than establishing the characters really clearly. So when they speak, it's the character's opinion. It's a lot harder to be offended at, for example, a racist idiot in a show when it's clear that the writer doesn't even really want to be writing those lines. You feel safer than if it's like, I think the writer kind of wanted to use those words.
Yeah, yes, it's that confidence, isn't it? I've got one last question for you. Yep. I promise this is the last one, then we'll wrap up so you can get back.
I'm all good.
Get back on your treadmill. If there was one historic comedy show that you could have script edited or written on, what would it be?
Oh God! I mean, the thing is, if it worked, I don't need to have been on it in script editing.
That's true. Yeah.
So then you kind of go, oh, what you want is the noble failures. You want to kind of connect yourself to the noble failures. But as a writer, I would have loved to have done an episode of Drop the Dead Donkey, actually. That was a great ensemble cast, a huge deep bench of characters to pull from. Perfect balance of like credible situation and real world things connected to a live studio audience comedy who demand good laughs. The weird pressure of having to do topical jokes at the last minute, which I would have hated. But the show itself is such a, but yeah, you wouldn't, yeah, there are definitely shows that don't work and you go, oh, you should have called me. I could have come and helped with that. But they're the failures. They're the ones nobody remembers.
Oh, yeah, they just died a death. The noble failures. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today and for all your great questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get round to all of them, but we've answered quite a few. And do follow Andrew on Twitter. He's really funny there. and keep an eye out for all the shows coming up. You've been working on quite a few things recently, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been quite. We've had a good front end of the year. So right now, Intelligence is on Sky. So Now TV with Nick Mohammed's show with David Schwimmer in it. In My Skin is still on the iPlayer. Alma's Not Normal is still on the iPlayer. Red Dwarf, The Promised Land went out on Dave very successfully. Incredible how that came out. Wonderful, wonderful special. That was exactly the right kind of viewing for when the lockdown hit. It was like having all your old mates round. Something about having that gang of characters back. Yeah.
Lots going on. Thank you ever so much. Loads
Not
of
at all,
really
you're very welcome.
practical advice there. So thank you. That's incredible. And now I'm expecting we're going to get loads of comedy scripts coming in. Well, I hope so.
Well, I hope so.
Yes, I hope so. Everybody should be writing comedy in lockdown. It's what we need right now.
Don't write lockdown shows. Write the shows that make you. Anything with a big landscape would be marvelous right now.
Outside.
With huge sweeping drone shots. But yeah, go and make people laugh. Please, God, I would click on that stuff all day.
Yeah, it's so important. Thank you very much, Andrew. Have a great day. Thanks for all your help and insight.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.